Polly Elam has served on the Rye Board of Directors for 23 years, am I right? 27 years. Whoa. She started when she was very young, she says. Polly has over 35, don't do the math on all of this, by the way, but she has over 35 years experience as a regional administrator of child care centers. And as a consultant, Polly has worked with numerous infant and toddler programs and has led seminars and workshops all over the world. Polly works with great passion and devotion to share Magda Gerber's educaring approach with others. So we're very glad that she's going to speak to us today. Please welcome Polly Elam.
This is so exciting. I feel like it's a family reunion because I know so many people here, and I just feel so blessed to be here. Thank you. And for my friends from New Zealand, kia ora. I'm spending a lot of time in New Zealand these days, and they're trying to teach me the language. So far, that's the only one I know. And kia kaha, stand tall. We're here to talk about one of my favorite topics, and I only have 30 minutes to do it in, so I'm going to try to condense it and focus on the most important thing by showing you photographs of programs that have been influenced by Magda's work, many of them that I have actually worked with. And on Friday, I had the opportunity to very briefly pull Sir Richard aside and talk to him about child care. And I share his concern about children being in child care, as did Magda. And some years ago, when I was working with Magda, and I had her with some of my colleagues who worked in child care, Magda kept asking, should children be raised in child care? Because she was very concerned about that. And of course, we kept making excuses, and she wouldn't accept any of them. And so finally, in frustration, I said to Magda, you know, there's not a person in the room who believes children should be raised in child care. But the reality is, in our country, they are going to be in child care. And so we want to know, how do we do it so that they are not harmed? And of course, if anyone, those of you who know Magda can relate to this statement. She says, Palika, I don't deal with reality, you do. And so she says, you figure it out and you help them. And that became my life's work, is how do I help people understand the impact that child care, unless we have good secondary attachment relationships for our children, the impact that it has on them for the rest of their lives. And not only that, the impact it has on their cognitive development. When I met Magda back in the late 70s, what she was talking about was curriculum for infants and toddlers was in the caregiving, or giving care. And I didn't fully understand what that meant until I began to try to implement this work in my own settings, because I was responsible for child care centers that had infants in care many years before it started to the degree that it is now in the United States. And so I finally went to Pickler Institute in Budapest, Hungary, where Magda had done her work with Dr. Pickler in the orphanage, and I was able to see firsthand what Magda was trying to teach me. I saw the practitioners or the nurses there working with the children, and yet I had to understand and learn at great expense that raising infants or having infants in a residential care is much different than in child care. But I did learn some lessons that I was able to bring back. And so 25 years later, the research in more recent years is finally proving what I learned from Magda those many years ago, and there are some common threads that run through quality child care, and I want to share those with you today. To foster strong secondary attachment between the carer and the child in group care, we must first build trusting, respectful relationships with the family. And I think in our society, we're starting to really recognize that everywhere. When I first started in childcare, I just thought, bring me your children and I'll take care of them, and you can just go and do what you want, and I'm just going to love and take care of your children. And then all of a sudden, I started to realize that they come with families. And I have to change my thinking about the families. And I need to know the families and know their vision of the child. And so that's what we work on so much now in implementing this work in child care settings, is how do we help the providers in the child care settings really open themselves up to the family and support families from the diverse communities that we all serve. And how do we get to know and understand their vision for their child and support that within all the constraints that we might have to deal with in child care? And one of the things that but let me tell you what my favorite work is. Because I do get to have the opportunity to travel to different countries and share this work in the classes, but my absolute favorite job, now that I've retired from my other job, is I contract, or I'm a consultant with child care centers where I go and sit in the classrooms with the caregivers. And I work with management, but I also work with caregivers firsthand, helping them to understand how to be with infants and how to see infants the way Magda taught me to see infants. And I absolutely love that work. And so one of the things that I'm doing with those programs that I'm consulting is helping them to open up to the family and get to know the family through home visits. Now, we all know here in the States that many of us have done home visits for many years, especially for the older children. And what we do in home visits is we often go and sit in the child's bedroom and see how the child plays and gets to know the child. But what we encourage for those carers who are going to be caring for infants and toddlers is to visit the home and have a social setting with the parents, specifically with the mother if the father's not available, but to have a more family social time with the child, with the infant or the toddler present, so that the child can see us working together. And I have several centers that are starting to do that and are starting to see the results of meeting the family within their own home and spending a lot of time with the mother rather than just going to play with the child. And then when the child comes into the center, we have what we call, or we encourage, what we call the gentle entry. And we have in several programs that I'm working with now, a commitment with the family that they must bring their child to the child care setting and care for the child for the first week in the presence of the caregiver. And that gives the caregiver the opportunity to observe the caring relationship between the mother. And my last two gentle entries were with fathers, actually, who were bringing the child into the setting, which was very interesting for me to observe and to participate with. But within that gentle entry, they stay for the first week and they do all the care in that. And we try to, on the first day, to have them come for the first few hours when there are not as many children present in that little group. And then the second week, when we have to watch, and I will show you some film or slides in a few minutes of the observing, but we watch the parent and then we watch the child And we have already selected who might be the secondary attachment figure. It was interesting that Richard said he hates the term caregiver. I have long since hated the term caregiver, but I've never came up with a better word. And in our profession, of course, caregiver has become the term that we use for those who give the care. And last night I wrestled with trying to come up with another term, and he was yesterday using a secondary attachment figure. And I'm thinking S-A-F, safe. Okay, we'll be calling them the safe. I don't think that's going to fly, but we still need to struggle with a different title because I don't like the term caregiver either. But with a secondary care, then this is a child, and actually this is, she's in the room, Jude. She's one of our people who has a toddler program in the home, and they have gone through this kind of arrangement of getting to know the family, and this is the child coming in. And for those who haven't figured it out, Jude, and he's saying goodbye to the mother. But what we encourage is, within our settings, is to create a primary caregiving policy that is valued and fully understood. And the primary caregiving policy is the primary caregiver. I also don't like that term primary caregiver because the primary caregiver is really the parents. But this is the secondary attachment figure, or for this purposes, the primary caregiver. Who is going to be caring for this child. And the primary caregiver does nothing but care for her group of children. She doesn't have extra duties of running out, doing this or that or this or that, you know. And I also like to go visit centers because I like to collect ideas. And I visited a center not too long ago, and the person said she's the primary caregiver in this room. And I said, oh, well, I've been there this morning and I didn't observe you. She goes, no, I do the DRDPR, which are the assessments in California, and I do the observations, and she tells me all the paperwork that she does, but she doesn't actually give the care. And see, so to me, when I'm saying create a primary caregiving policy, the policy has to be the person who gives the care is seen as the secondary attachment figure. And so when the child is brought in a gentle entry situation, we observe to see if the connection is happening. And we already know that the child comes into life already knowing that it needs to connect with another. It's pre-wired to do that, and most often it's with the family. But in the secondary caring situations, we want to see that same connection happening. And we want to see not only the gaze, we want to see if the adult is also relaxed with the child. We want to see if the child can capture the adult gaze. And then we can start to see that they are connected. It might not be an attachment yet, but we can see that she is open to being in a relationship with the child. Now, we have many centers who now in early childhood, relationship-based child care seems to be the buzzword. But the thing with relationships is that often in childcare, the adult is still the one who defines the relationship. And what we want to have is the adult and the child coming together, with the adult being open to the child and accepting the child on the child's terms, rather than having the child, and no adult says, okay, I'm going to have you accept me, but sometimes unconsciously that's what we expect. Is it a good fit? And so we look for those kinds of things, and then we provide ongoing coaching and work with the caregiver in order to help her to develop this kind of relationship. There have been occasions when we realize this is not going to be a good connection, and so then we have to look at other things. But typically, that's what my work is to coach the caregiver to have this kind of connection, not only with the child, but also with the family. And then we get to this kind of relationship where there's this teasing back and forth. And what we try to help the caregiver and the parents understand, it's this strong relationship that becomes the anchor and the springboard for other areas of learning within the child care center. And, you know, sometimes we have to, well, all the time, we have to understand that mothers especially are a little bit afraid of these close secondary relationships. And so we have to help the parent become comfortable with these strong attachment relationships. And so it's this kind of, you know, we look at this and the child is learning a lot about themselves. They're starting to, you know, the caregiver is the mirror that gives the child, that reflects to the child that you are someone who is special and worthy and loved, and the way she cares for him. And then this gentle laughing and teasing back and forth begins to have the child know that I can make this caregiver, I can control this relationship a little bit. The other thing that we do is recognize that in a child care setting, the attachment figure or the primary caregiver cannot always be there or always be the, because sometimes children are in childcare for many hours, but she also needs a lunch break, she needs to go to the bathroom and all of those other things. So in our staffing, we encourage a secondary or a partner who works with her, and she also helps with that relationship. So the primary caregiver then becomes the coordinator of the child's care within the child care setting. And while they both care for the child, it's the primary caregiver who really knows the child and monitors the child's needs. She also becomes an advocate for the child and the family within the child care center. Now, in smaller centers, it's not as essential, but in the States we have large child care centers. And I was in one of my centers recently when it was the day that they were supposed to do the fire drill. And so the primary came into the office and said, I want to remind you the fire drill needs to be canceled today because we have a child who is still in gentle entry and is having some issues with adjusting and might be frightened, and so we can't have the fire drill today. And so those are the kinds of things that they become the advocate for, is keeping everybody within the setting focused on her individual child's needs. And it's within the context of these caring relationships that our children develop these nurturing relationships with each other. They care for each other. They begin to develop these empathetic kinds of feelings. And so the child is not only learning about themselves, but also modeling the behaviors of the caregivers through their own actions. We also encourage that the centers organize small groups of children with several developmental levels. And I know in the States now, because we have had long discussions even this weekend, about the family settings where you have maybe multi-ages within a little group setting. And some of them are very successful. Although I tell you that in my travels, I have not seen very many programs, and if you have one, please invite me because I want to learn my lessons from you. I've not seen many programs where you have a 3-year-old and a small infant and a toddler and maybe another infant in a group that you can be together without someone having to either be restricted or I have not seen it work well. And Magda, I remember, would often say that doing childcare is already hard, so why make it harder? And so she encouraged us always to have children of a similar developmental level in a group together. She also encourages a low adult-child ratios where you would have maybe 4 children with 1 care. With our tiny babies, we would prefer 3 babies with 1 caregiver. And I think that in the state of California especially, that's what we have because it's regulated that way within the states. I often tell people, do you know what Magda taught us to be, how Magda taught us to be with infants is within the government regulations. We just have to translate them a little bit better than sometimes we do. Do you, the people from California, do you agree that that's true? And it's within this small groups that we can help. They become cohesive group of children. This is at the college near my home. It's a wonderful program. And their director studied with Magda. And this is a little, another time when they are in a small group of children, then you have these conflict situations that the carer can be close by and help them with their social skills. And you can see this little guy is taken this little guy's toy. And he wants it, but he looks for help. And she's there to be a supporter while they work on their social interactions. And with a larger group setting, that could not happen because there would be too many children. The other thing about group sizes, and people will say, well, in this room we can have 12 children, but we have a lot of adults. We have enough adults. The adult-child ratio is good. But the research is telling us that the size of the group is almost more important than the adult-child ratios. And when there are too many children in the group and too many adults in the group, then it's too much stimulation. And then often when we have abiding situations in some of the programs that I'm consulting with, it's often because the group size is too large. Doesn't matter if the room is really big, and it doesn't matter if we have enough adults in there, it's the biting that happens. And so sometimes we go in and we might make the group, we might have to do some furniture moves and some other kinds of things to reduce the group sizes. And usually we want no more than 8 babies together with their 2 primary carers and secondary carers available when we need them to replace the other primary caregivers. We don't like too many adults in the room at one time with the children. And again, within the smaller groups, we develop these kinds of friendships so that we nurture and care for each other. And then we like to provide continuity for the children. And for continuity, for those who aren't familiar with continuity, I think it's starting to become well known in the States now, is we would like for the carer who starts out with a group of children, and here in the States we can do it usually in the transitions in August or September because the older children go off to school. The children who've gotten older can now go to the different places with the appropriate playground equipment and furniture. And then we bring in the newest babies, and we like the newest babies who are starting on their backs or within this little age span, who starts with the primary carer. And then we do the gentle entry with a couple of babies. We don't start them all on the same day, but maybe one or two babies come in at a time, and then we sort of try to bring them in within the month. And then that person stays with her family, or in this case, his family, or his group of children, and move all the way up until they are 3 years old, although I have one program now where they're going on to the preschool years with them. And so primary care and the same cares in peer groups also supports this knowing the child's and picking up the child's cues for their developmental stages and being available to help the child develop independence. And then the smaller groups are able to allow the children to take risk and be supportive. And then I'm getting the cue that it's almost time to end. And I have my biggest plug right here, is we make a commitment in order to have a program that fosters attachment-ready staff, a high-quality program. We've got to make a commitment to knowledgeable, attachment-ready staff. And I think that in the state of California especially, we need to be doing a better job at that. We do not fully recognize the emotional impact that giving care to other people's children have on our caregivers. And in order to have attachment-ready staff, we need to take very good care of those people who give direct care. And that means we need to create a forum where they can voice their concerns, their feelings in a safe way. As Magda taught me, we need to give the adults what we want them to give the children. That means respect, time. You can give me a standing ovation on that one, because that's my soapbox. I'm on all the time. But what did you give to the staff? Did you give them a break? Do you let them go out of the room when they're starting to feel stressed? Do you give them some relief? Do you pay them a decent wage? Oh my goodness. If you have not had a chance to read a book, there is one called We Are Not Robots, and it's written by Enid Elliott. She's out of the University of Victoria in Canada, and she has interviewed and talks about the emotional impact that giving care to children has on our caregivers. And I will close by just sharing this with you, because I think of it in this way. We bring these 3-4 groups together: parents, children, management, and caregivers. And they all have a history, they all have needs, they all have desires. And we all need to find balance to make it work for everybody. But it's often the caregiver who tries to balance it all within the context of what financial constraints that management gives us. It's often on the backs of the caregivers. It's often the caregiver having to suppress, and sometimes unconsciously, her own needs in order to meet the needs of the parents and the child. And sometimes when her feelings about her caregiving feelings, her history is in conflict with the parents and still having a healthy relationship with the parents. Takes that understanding from management, that place where she feels safe to say, I just need to talk about this. So if you are a person in this room who gives direct care to children, I applaud you. It's people like you who are going to hold this world together. So thank you very much.